I was 23 years old when I walked out of Riverside Reform School with nothing but a worn duffel bag, $72 in my pocket, and a heart full of anger that felt like it might consume me from the inside out. The iron gates clanged shut behind me, and I didn't look back. I couldn't. Looking back meant remembering the 3 years I'd lost, the accusations that weren't true, the so-called friends who'd set me up to take the fall for something I didn't do. They'd walked free while I paid the price. The justice system had chewed me up and spit me out, and now I was supposed to just rejoin society like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. My grandmother had passed away while I was inside. She was the only family I had left after my parents died in a car accident when I was 15. Gran had raised me, taught me everything about hard work and integrity, and I hadn't even been able to attend her funeral. They denied my request for compassionate leave, said I was a flight risk, me. The kid who'd never even gotten a speeding ticket before that night everything went wrong. I'd written her letters every week, pouring my heart out onto paper, telling her I was innocent, begging her to believe me. I'd gotten 3 letters back before the nurses at her care facility told me she'd stopped being able to write. Then nothing. Then the notification that she was gone. That was 8 months ago, and the grief was still so fresh it felt like someone had carved a hole in my chest that would never heal. The county had sold her house to pay off her medical debts. Everything she'd owned was gone, liquidated, scattered to the winds. I had nothing. No home, no job prospects with a record, no references who'd vouch for me. Just that $72 and a burning desire to prove that I wasn't what they'd made me out to be. I'd spent my nights in that cell, planning, dreaming, imagining what I'd do when I got out. I'd rebuild, I'd start over, I'd show everyone who'd written me off that Tommy Mitchell wasn't a criminal, wasn't trash, wasn't someone to be forgotten. I spent my first night of freedom in a homeless shelter in Portland, Oregon, staring at the cracked ceiling and listening to the sounds of dozens of other broken people trying to sleep. The next morning, I went to the public library and spent hours on the computer, searching for any opportunity that might give me a fresh start. That's when I saw it. An online auction for a small farm in rural Washington, about 200 miles north. The starting bid was $100. The photos showed an old farmhouse that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind, a sagging barn, overgrown fields, and what appeared to be several pieces of rusted farm equipment slowly being reclaimed by nature. The description was brutally honest. Property sold as is, significant repairs needed, no utilities currently connected, buyer responsible for all back taxes and fees. It was perfect. It was exactly what someone like me could afford, and more importantly, it was far enough away from Portland that I could disappear, start fresh where nobody knew my name or my story. I watched that auction like a hawk for 3 days, camping out at the library from open to close. On the final day, with just 10 minutes left, the bid was still at $100. Nobody wanted this place. It was too remote, too run down, too much work, but I saw possibility. I saw a chance. When the countdown hit 1 minute, I entered my bid, $100. My finger hovered over the confirm button, my heart hammering in my chest. This was it. This was everything I had. If I did this, I'd have nothing left, no safety net, no backup plan. I'd be all in on a property I'd never seen in person, in a town I'd never visited, betting my entire future on a pile of rotting wood and forgotten dreams. I clicked confirm. The 60 seconds that followed were the longest of my life. The page refreshed. Congratulations, you are the winning bidder. I'd done it. I owned a farm. Well, I would own it once I figured out how to pay the back taxes, which according to the fine print totaled another $850. I had $72. I was already in over my head, and I hadn't even seen the place yet. The next week was a blur of desperation and hustle. I took every odd job I could find, working construction day labor for cash, unloading trucks at the docks at night, doing anything and everything to scrape together money. I slept in the shelter, ate at soup kitchens, and saved every single penny. Other guys at the shelter thought I was crazy. "Man, you're buying a farm. You don't know nothing about farming." They were right, I didn't. But I knew about surviving, and I knew about refusing to quit, and I figured that was at least a start. 3 weeks later, I had $940. It had cost me blisters, exhaustion, and more sweat than I thought one human body could produce, but I had it. I paid the back taxes at the county office, signed a mountain of paperwork I barely understood, and received the deed to my new property. 47 acres in a place called Meadowbrook, Washington, population 632. The clerk looked at me with something between pity and confusion. "You know that property's been abandoned for almost 12 years, right? Old man Hendricks died, and his kids wanted nothing to do with it. It's been sitting empty ever since." I nodded. I knew. That's why I could afford it. I hitchhiked north, getting rides from truckers who shared their coffee and sandwiches and asked few questions. When I finally arrived in Meadowbrook, it was early evening, and the tiny downtown consisted of one stoplight, a general store, a diner, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975. I asked for directions to the old Hendricks place, and the woman at the gas station gave me a long, measuring look before pointing down a winding country road. "About 5 miles that way. Can't miss it. It's the only place that looks like it's been through a war. And can I continue to Block 2? Sim 1658 Block 2. Words, 1001, 2000. I walked those 5 miles as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were so beautiful they almost made me forget how terrified I was. What if this was a massive mistake? What if the place was even worse than the photos suggested? What if I'd just thrown away every penny I had on a fantasy that could never become reality? But I kept walking, because turning back wasn't an option. It never had been. When I finally saw the property, my heart sank. The photos hadn't lied, but they'd been kind. The farmhouse was worse in person, with half the porch rotted through, windows broken or missing entirely, and what looked like a family of raccoons living in the upstairs bedroom based on the sounds coming from inside. The barn was leaning at an angle that defied physics, held up by nothing but stubbornness and prayer. The fields were a jungle of weeds, blackberry bushes, and small trees that had taken root in what had once been cultivated land, and scattered throughout the property like the bones of some ancient civilization were pieces of farm equipment so rusted and overgrown that I could barely identify what they'd once been. I dropped my duffel bag on what remained of the front porch and sat down hard, suddenly feeling the weight of every decision that had led me to this moment. I was alone, broke, on a property that would take years to restore, with no electricity, no running water, and winter coming in a few months. For the first time since walking out of Riverside, I felt tears burning in my eyes. What was I doing? Who did I think I was? I wasn't a farmer, I wasn't a carpenter. I was just a kid who'd gotten screwed by life and was too stubborn to admit defeat. Gran would have known what to do. She always knew what to do. But Gran was gone, and I was on my own. I let myself feel sorry for myself for exactly 10 minutes. Then I wiped my eyes, stood up, and decided that tomorrow I'd start figuring this out. Tonight, I'd find a place to sleep that didn't have raccoons in it. I ended up in the barn, which was surprisingly more intact on the inside than it looked from outside. I cleared a space in one of the old stalls, spread out my sleeping bag, and fell asleep to the sound of mice scurrying in the walls and the wind whistling through the gaps in the boards. The next morning, I woke with the sunrise and began the overwhelming task of taking inventory of what I'd actually bought. The house would need months of work before it was habitable. The barn was structurally unsound in at least 3 places I could see immediately. The well in the front yard might still work, but I'd need to test it, and then there was all that equipment scattered around the property. I spent the entire day just walking the land, making mental notes, trying to prioritize what needed to be done first. It was during this survey that I really looked at the old tractor for the first time. It was parked behind the barn, so completely overgrown with vines and brush that I'd almost missed it entirely. It was a John Deere, probably from the 1960s, based on the style. Green paint faded to a pale ghost of itself, tires flat and cracked, but somehow still possessing a kind of dignity, despite its abandonment. I'd never driven a tractor in my life, never worked on engines beyond changing oil in a car, but something about it called to me. Maybe because it looked like I felt, forgotten and left to rot, but still standing, still there. I decided to clear the brush away from it, partly because I needed to do something productive, and partly because I was curious if there was any chance it could ever run again. I worked all afternoon, pulling away blackberry vines that had grown through the wheel wells, cutting back saplings that had sprouted around it, sweeping away years of accumulated leaves and debris. As the sun started to set on my second day as a landowner, I'd finally cleared enough to really see what I was working with. That's when I noticed something odd. The tractor's seat was slightly askew, like it had been moved and not quite put back right. I climbed up onto the tractor, my boots crunching on the rusty metal, and tried to adjust the seat back into position. It wouldn't budge at first, rusted in place after all these years, but I kept working at it, jiggling and pulling, until finally something gave way. The seat lifted up, and I realized it wasn't just a seat, but a storage compartment, something I'd never known tractors had. And inside that compartment, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth, but was now mostly disintegrated fabric, was a metal box. My hands were shaking as I lifted it out. The box was about the size of a large shoebox, made of tin that had rusted around the edges but was still intact. It had weight to it, something substantial inside. There was no lock, just a simple latch that had rusted shut. I carried it carefully into the barn, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. What were the odds? What were the actual odds that I'd find something hidden in a tractor on a property nobody had wanted, that I'd bought for $100 because I had no other options? I used a screwdriver from my duffel bag to work the latch free, prying carefully so I wouldn't damage whatever was inside. When it finally popped open, I had to sit down. Inside the box were bundles of cash, old bills wrapped in rubber bands that disintegrated at my touch. Beneath the money were papers, documents, and photographs. And beneath all of that was a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age but still readable. My mind was racing. How much money was this? Who had hidden it? Why? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do about it? I counted the money 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. $8,400. In today's money, that might not sound like a fortune, but to me, sitting in a barn with $17 left to my name, it was everything. It was the difference between surviving and thriving. It was materials to fix the house, tools to work the land, food to eat while I figured out how to make this place productive. It was hope in physical form, but it wasn't mine. It belonged to someone, had been hidden by someone for some reason, and taking it would make me the kind of person the courts had accused me of being, a thief. I opened the journal with trembling hands and began to read by the fading light coming through the barn walls. The handwriting was shaky but legible, and the first entry was dated April 15th, 1998. My name is Robert Hendricks, and if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I hope whoever finds this has better luck than I did. I read through the night, learning the story of the man who'd owned this farm before me, the man whose death had eventually led to me sitting here in this barn, holding his secrets in my hands. Robert Hendricks had been a farmer his whole life, had inherited this land from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before that. He'd raised 4 children here with his wife Margaret, had worked this soil for 53 years, had poured his entire life into making this place productive and beautiful. But in his later years, everything had fallen apart. His wife had developed Alzheimer's and needed expensive care. Medical bills piled up. The farm stopped being profitable as corporate agriculture moved in and small farmers couldn't compete. His children had all moved away, building lives in cities, wanting nothing to do with the hard life of farming. He'd sold off equipment, then livestock, then parcels of land, watching his legacy slowly dismantled to pay for his wife's care. The money in the box was everything he had left. He'd hidden it because he didn't trust banks anymore, not after the savings and loan crisis had wiped out his parents' savings decades before. It was meant to be emergency money, money to keep the farm going, money to pass on to his children. But he'd gotten sick suddenly, cancer that moved fast, and he died before he could tell anyone about it. His children had sold the property without ever knowing their inheritance was hidden in a tractor behind the barn. Hey, if you've made it this far in the story, I'd really love it if you'd hit that subscribe button. Tommy's journey is just getting started, and trust me, what happens next is going to surprise you. Also, drop a comment and tell me, if you found $8,000 that technically belonged to someone else's family, what would you do? Would you try to find them, or would you keep it to survive? I'm genuinely curious what you all think, because Tommy's about to make a decision that'll change everything. Stick around, and let's see where this goes together. Can I continue to Block 3, Sim 1701 Block 3, words 2001-3000. The last entry in Robert Hendrick's journal was dated 3 days before he died. I need to tell the kids about the money, but they never visit anymore. They're busy with their own lives, and I understand. I wasn't always the best father. I was married to this land more than I was present for them. Sarah lives in Chicago now, hasn't been back in 6 years. Michael's in California, sends Christmas cards, but that's about it. Jenny moved to New York, and Thomas, my youngest, he's somewhere in Texas, last I heard. We don't talk much. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I should have let them choose their own paths instead of trying to force them to love this place the way I did. If something happens to me, I hope they know I loved them. I hope they forgive me. And I hope someone finds this money and uses it for something good, something that matters. Don't let it sit here and rot like everything else. I closed the journal and sat in the darkness of the barn, thinking about Robert Hendricks and his children, about legacy and regret, about money and what it means to different people. $8,000 could change my life right now. It could mean the difference between this farm becoming something real or me failing and ending up back on the streets. But it also belonged to 4 people who'd lost their father, who'd sold this property for probably next to nothing because they didn't want it, who had no idea their dad had left them something after all. I spent 3 days wrestling with the decision. I fixed what I could around the property with the $17 I had left, buying a few basic tools from the hardware store in town and eating as little as possible to stretch my money. I read through Robert's journal again and again, learning about his life, his struggles, his deep love for this land that his children had never shared. I thought about my own grandmother, about how she'd raised me to be honest, to do the right thing, even when it was hard. And I thought about the person I wanted to be versus the person that 3 years in reform school might have turned me into. On the 4th day, I made my decision. I would try to find Robert Hendrick's children and return the money. It was the right thing to do, even if it meant losing my only chance at making this farm work. Even if it meant I'd probably fail and lose everything. Because if I kept money that wasn't mine, if I built something on that foundation, I'd never be able to look at myself in the mirror without seeing exactly what those people who'd sent me away had accused me of being. I'd rather fail honestly than succeed as a thief. The problem was, I had no idea how to find them. The journal had first names and general locations, but no phone numbers, no addresses, nothing concrete. I went back to the public library in town and spent hours searching online, but Sarah Hendricks in Chicago could be any of 200 different people. Same with Michael in California and Jenny in New York. Thomas in Texas was even more impossible. I was about to give up when the librarian, a kind woman in her 60s named Mrs. Patterson, asked if I needed help. I explained what I was trying to do, leaving out the part about the money, but saying I'd found some personal items of Robert Hendricks that I wanted to return to his family. Her face lit up. "Oh, I knew Robert. Lovely man. Terrible what happened to him and Margaret. You know, his daughter Sarah used to work at the bank here in town before she moved away. I bet Doris over at the county records office would have forwarding addresses from when the property was sold. They would have had to notify all the heirs. It took another week of persistence, phone calls, and navigating bureaucracy, but I finally got a phone number for Sarah Hendricks in Chicago. I must have picked up the phone 20 times before I actually dialed, my heart racing, not knowing what to say or how to explain. When she finally answered, her voice was professional, busy, the voice of someone who didn't have time for unexpected calls from strangers. "This is Sarah Hendricks." I stumbled through my introduction, explaining that I'd bought her father's old farm, that I'd found some things that belonged to him, that I thought she and her siblings should have them. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice changed, became softer, younger somehow. "You're at the farm, Dad's farm." I told her I was, told her about the tractor and the box, though I still didn't mention the money, just said there were personal items and documents. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear her breathing, could feel the weight of memories and complicated feelings traveling across the phone line. "I haven't thought about that place in years," she finally said. "When Dad died, we just wanted to be done with it. It had taken so much from our family, you know? Mum's medical bills, Dad's cancer, watching him work himself to death, trying to hold on to something none of us wanted. We sold it for whatever we could get and divided it 4 ways. Got about $3,000 each after all the debts were paid, used it to pay off credit cards and forgot about it." She paused. "What kind of personal items did you find?" I took a deep breath. "Money. Your dad hid $8,400 in the tractor, and there's a journal. He wrote about all of you, about how much he loved you, about regrets he had. I think you should have it. All of it. It belongs to you and your brothers and sister." The silence that followed was so long I thought she'd hung up. Then I heard her crying, soft sobs that she was trying to muffle. "He left us money? After everything, after all the bills and the debt, he managed to save money." Her voice broke. "We thought there was nothing left. We thought he'd spent everything on Mom's care and his treatments. We thought the farm was just this burden he'd saddled us with." Over the next hour, Sarah told me about her childhood on the farm, about early mornings helping her dad with chores, about fighting with him as a teenager because she wanted to leave and see the world, about the guilt she carried for not visiting more before he died. She gave me phone numbers for Michael, Jenny, and Thomas, and over the next few days, I called each of them. Each conversation was different, but they all carried the same thread of complicated grief, of childhoods shaped by that land, of love mixed with resentment, of regrets about things said and unsaid. 2 weeks later, all 4 of them came to the farm. It was the first time they'd been back since their father's funeral, the first time they'd been together in the same place in over 8 years. I watched from inside the barn as they pulled up in their rental cars, watched them stand in the overgrown driveway, looking at the place that had defined their early lives, now falling apart and being reclaimed by nature. Sarah was tall and professional-looking, wearing a business suit that seemed out of place in the rural setting. Michael was heavy-set with kind eyes and a nervous laugh. Jenny had her father's face, I could tell from the photos in the journal, and she was crying before she even got out of the car. Thomas, the youngest at 31, just stood there silently, hands in his pockets, looking at everything with an expression I couldn't read. I met them at the barn with the metal box, the journal, and the documents I'd found. I'd kept the money exactly as I'd found it, hadn't spent a single dollar, even though I'd been living on canned beans and whatever odd jobs I could find in town. Sarah opened the box with shaking hands, and all 4 of them stared at the money like it was something from another world. Then Jenny picked up the journal and started reading, and within minutes all of them were crying, passing it around, reading passages out loud to each other. "Listen to this," Michael said, his voice thick. "April 3rd, 1997. Michael called today. He got the promotion at his company. I'm so proud of him, even though I never told him that enough. I was always pushing him to take over the farm, never asked what he wanted. I see that now. He's building something good in California, something that makes him happy. That should have been enough for me." Michael wiped his eyes. I never knew he felt that way. He was always so disappointed in me for leaving. They spent hours there, reading the journal, sharing memories, laughing and crying, and slowly rebuilding connections that had frayed over years of distance and unspoken hurts. I tried to give them privacy, working on clearing more brush from around the property, but eventually Sarah called me over. The four of them were sitting on the tailgate of Michael's rental truck, and they had the money counted and separated into 4 piles. $2,100 each, Sarah said. That's how we always split things, equal 4 ways. She picked up one of the piles and held it out to me. This is yours. I started to protest, but she cut me off. Tommy, you could have kept all of this. You bought this property legally. Anything you found on it was legally yours. You didn't have to find us. You didn't have to give us our father's journal, which honestly means more than the money. You did the right thing when it would have been so easy to do the wrong thing. Dad would have respected that. Hell, Dad would have liked you. Thomas spoke up for the first time. You planning to farm this place? I shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. I'm going to try. I don't know anything about farming, but I'm going to try. He nodded slowly. Dad loved this land. It killed him in the end, but he loved it. Someone should love it again. Jenny wiped her eyes and smiled. You're going to need help. That house isn't going to fix itself, and winter comes early up here. Michael stood up, looking around at the property with new eyes. I've got 2 weeks of vacation time. Haven't used it in 3 years. I could stick around, help you get the basics sorted. Can I continue to Block 4? Sim 1702 Block 4, words 3001 4000. And that's how it started. What I thought would be a brief afternoon meeting turned into something I never could have anticipated. Michael did stay for 2 weeks, and he brought practical skills I desperately needed. He'd worked construction during college, knew his way around power tools and structural repairs. Together we shored up the barn, replaced the rotted sections of the porch, and got the well working again. It turned out the pump just needed a new motor, which we found at a salvage yard 2 towns over for $60. Having running water felt like winning the lottery. Jenny came back the following month with her husband Marcus, who was an electrician. They spent a long weekend getting basic power restored to the house, running new lines and replacing the ancient breaker box that was practically a fire hazard. She also brought boxes of her father's old farming books, guides on crop rotation and soil management and seasonal planting that Robert had collected over decades. You'll need these more than I ever will, she said, handing them over. Dad would want them to be used, not sitting in my storage unit in Brooklyn. Sarah couldn't take time off work, but she sent money every month, small amounts that she insisted were investments in the farm. Dad believed in this place for 53 years, she wrote in an email. The least I can do is believe in it for a few months, see if you can make something work. Her contributions paid for seeds, fertilizer, and a used rototiller that became my best friend that first spring. Thomas surprised everyone by quitting his job in Texas and showing up in early March with a truck full of his belongings and a quiet announcement that he was staying. I've been managing a sporting goods store for 6 years, he said, unpacking his things into one of the upstairs bedrooms we'd finally made habitable. It paid the bills, but I was miserable. Every single day I'd think about this place, about how Dad needed help and none of us were here for him. I can't change the past, but maybe I can do something useful now. Having Thomas there changed everything. 2 people could accomplish 3 times as much as 1 person working alone. We developed a rhythm, a partnership built on early mornings, and shared purpose. We spent that first spring learning everything the hard way. We planted too late, then too early, then finally figured out the timing by paying attention to what the neighboring farms were doing. We borrowed equipment from those neighbors too, once they realized we were serious about bringing the Hendricks farm back to life. Old Earl from the property to the east brought over his tractor to help us plow the fields, refusing payment, but accepting fresh coffee and conversation. Your granddaddy and I farmed side by side for 30 years, he told Thomas. About time someone brought some life back to this place. It was dying here, watching it fall apart. Day we started small, just 5 acres of potatoes and another 3 of sweet corn. We figured those were hardy crops, difficult to completely screw up, and there was steady demand at the farmers' markets in the surrounding towns. That first harvest was pitiful by professional standards, our yield about half of what it should have been, but we sold every single potato and ear of corn we grew. People in Meadowbrook wanted to support us, wanted to see the old Hendricks place succeed again. They remembered Robert, remembered Margaret, and they were rooting for the two young guys, trying to honor that legacy. By our second year, we'd expanded to 15 acres and added green beans, tomatoes, and several varieties of squash. Thomas discovered he had his father's gift for coaxing life from soil, could look at a plant and know what it needed, whether it was being overwatered or under-fertilized or attacked by some pest I couldn't even see. I handled the business side, learned about crop insurance and agricultural loans, and the 1,000 small regulations that govern farming in America. We were making it work, not getting rich but paying our bills, putting food on the table, slowly fixing up the house and barn. Sarah visited that summer and cried when she saw the fields green and productive again, the barn standing straight, the house with fresh paint and new windows. "Dad would be so happy," she kept saying. This is what he always wanted, for this place to matter again. Michael brought his whole family at Thanksgiving, his wife and 3 kids who'd never seen a working farm before. Watching his children run through the fields, chasing chickens we'd recently acquired, picking the last of the pumpkins, I saw him smile in a way his sister said she hadn't seen in years. "He's connecting with something," Jenny whispered to me. "Something he didn't know he'd lost." The old tractor became our pet project. Thomas and I spent winter evenings in the barn, slowly bringing it back to life. We replaced the tires, rebuilt the engine, cleaned decades of rust and grime from every surface. It took us 4 months of work, hundreds of hours and more YouTube tutorial videos than I could count. But the day that engine finally turned over and roared to life was one of the best days of my life. We'd resurrected something that everyone had written off as dead, and in doing it, we'd somehow resurrected ourselves too. By the 3rd year, the farm was profitable. Not wildly successful, but making enough that Thomas and I could both draw small salaries and reinvest in expanding our operation. We'd added chickens, then goats, then a small herd of cattle that grazed on the portions of the property too hilly for crops. We hired our first employee, a kid from town named Danny, who reminded me of myself at his age, eager and hard-working and needing someone to believe in him. We built a farm stand at the end of the driveway that was open on weekends, selling our produce and eggs and fresh goat cheese that Thomas learned to make following recipes from one of Robert's old books. The Hendricks siblings became regular visitors. Sarah came every few months, started bringing her elderly mother-in-law who had dementia and seemed to find peace in the quiet rhythms of farm life. Michael's family came every summer and Christmas, his kids begging to help with chores and learn about farming. Jenny and Marcus bought a small cabin on a lake about an hour away, using it as a weekend retreat and base for visiting the farm. And Thomas had found his home. He was here every day, had met a woman named Rachel who worked at the feed store in the next town over, and they were talking about building a small house on the back 40 acres where the old apple orchard used to be. One evening in late summer of that 3rd year, all 4 siblings were at the farm for a barbecue. We were sitting around a fire pit Thomas and I had built from stones we'd cleared from the fields, watching the sun set over land that was healthy and productive again. Sarah had brought the metal box, now empty of money, but still carrying the weight of memory. She set it on the picnic table and pulled out Robert's journal, which she'd been keeping safe. "I want to read you something," she said. "It's from near the end, about 2 weeks before Dad died." She cleared her throat and began reading by the light of the fire. "June 10th, 2010. I know I'm dying. The doctors don't say it directly, but I can see it in their eyes. I've been thinking about what I'm leaving behind. The kids don't want the farm, and I can't blame them. I pushed too hard, held on too tight, made this land into a burden instead of a gift. But I still believe in this place. I believe that land, good land worked with honest hands, has value beyond money. I believe that growing food, raising animals, living in rhythm with seasons and weather and soil connects us to something fundamental. I hope someday someone who understands that will find this place, someone who sees possibility instead of problems, someone who'll love this land the way it deserves to be loved. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of the goats settling in their pen for the night. Finally, Thomas spoke. He found that someone. 2 of them, actually. Sarah smiled, tears reflecting the firelight. Yeah, he did. And Tommy, I know you think you owe us something because we gave you money to help fix this place up. But the truth is, you gave us something much more valuable. You gave us our father back. Not the bitter, tired man we remember from the end, but the man who loved this land and believed in honest work and family. You gave us a reason to come back, to be together, to remember the good instead of just the hurt. Michael raised his beer bottle. To Robert Hendricks, who hid $8,000 in a tractor and somehow brought all of us back together because of it. We all drank to that, to second chances, and found family and the strange ways that life works out when you make the right choice, even when it's the hard one. Jenny looked at me across the fire. Tommy, we never asked. What happened before you came here? How does someone your age end up buying an abandoned farm with $100? I'd never told them the full story. Had kept my past locked away like Robert's money in that tractor seat. But sitting there, surrounded by people who'd accepted me, trusted me, become something like family, I felt safe enough to share it. So I told them about the reform school, about the charges that weren't true, about friends who'd betrayed me, and a system that had failed me. I told them about losing my grandmother while I was locked up, about having nothing and nowhere, and deciding to bet everything on a property no one else wanted. I told them about finding that box and making the choice to return it, even though keeping it would have made everything so much easier. When I finished, Thomas was staring at me with something like awe. You were in our barn, broke and alone, and you found $8,000, and you still chose to find us and give it back. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. My grandmother raised me to do the right thing. I wasn't going to let reform school change that. Sarah was crying again, which seemed to be her default state when emotions ran high. Tommy, do you understand what you did? You proved that the system was wrong about you. You proved that being a good person isn't about what happens to you. It's about the choices you make, and you made the right choice. Can I continue to block 5, final block? Sim 17 to 05 block 5, words 4001 5000. The farm continued to grow over the next few years, but more importantly, so did the sense of purpose and family that had taken root there. We expanded our operations to include a small farmers market presence in 3 surrounding towns, became known for quality produce and honest dealing. Danny, our first employee, brought in his younger sister Maya when she graduated high school, and she discovered a talent for social media marketing that transformed our business. She started an Instagram account for the farm, posting photos of sunrise over the fields, baby goats jumping on hay bales, Thomas covered in mud but grinning after a successful harvest. Within 6 months, we had 5,000 followers and people driving from 2 hours away to visit our farm stand. The house that had been barely standing when I first arrived became a real home. We'd restored it room by room, keeping as much of the original character as possible while making it functional and comfortable. The kitchen where Margaret Hendricks had cooked meals for her family now saw Thomas and Rachel cooking together on weekends, experimenting with recipes using our own produce. The living room where Robert had sat by the fire, reading farming journals, now hosted family dinners every Sunday, with a table that often seated 10 or 12 people, a rotating cast of Hendricks siblings, their families, employees and neighbors who'd become friends. I turned 28 in the spring of our 5th year on the farm. Sarah organized a surprise party, filling the barn with people from town, from neighboring farms, from every corner of my new life. Earl, who'd been the first to help us, gave a speech about watching the land come back to life and how proud Robert would have been. Mrs. Patterson from the library presented me with a framed photo she'd found in the town archives, showing the farm in its glory days in the 1980s, fields green and productive, barns standing proud. "I thought you should see what it looked like when Robert's father ran it," she said. "And I have to say, you boys are getting close to matching it." That summer, something unexpected happened. A reporter from a regional magazine heard about our story, about the abandoned farm bought for $100, the money found and returned, the family reunited, the land restored. She spent a week with us, interviewing everyone, photographing the daily rhythms of farm life. When the article came out 3 months later, it was the cover story. "Growing more than crops. How one man's honesty planted the seeds of second chances." The publicity was overwhelming. We got emails from across the country, from other young people who wanted to try farming, from families dealing with inherited land they didn't know what to do with, from formerly incarcerated people looking for hope that they could rebuild their lives. One email hit particularly hard. It was from a woman named Patricia, who'd seen the article and recognized the story of the reform school in Portland. "I was part of the legal team that prosecuted your case," she wrote. "I've thought about it often over the years, especially after 2 of the witnesses recanted their testimony last year. New evidence came to light that supported your claims of innocence. It's too late to give you back those 3 years, but I wanted you to know that people within the system know you were treated unjustly. Your record has been expunged. You're no longer listed as a convicted offender. I know this doesn't fix what happened, but I hope it provides some closure." I read that email 5 times, sitting alone in the barn where I'd first opened Robert's metal box and made the decision that changed everything. My record was clear. Officially, on paper, I was no longer defined by the worst thing that had ever happened to me. But the strange thing was, it didn't matter as much as I thought it would. The vindication was nice. The official acknowledgement that I'd been telling the truth all along, but I'd already proven to myself who I was. I'd proven it the night I chose to return that money. I'd proven it every morning I woke up before dawn to work this land. I'd proven it in every honest dealing, every kept promise, every moment I chose to be the person my grandmother had raised me to be. Thomas found me there an hour later, and I showed him the email. He read it silently, then sat down beside me on a hay bale. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "Grateful," I finally said. "Not just about this, but about everything. About finding this place. About your dad hiding that money where I'd find it. About making the choice to track you all down. If I'd kept that money, I'd have the farm, sure. But I wouldn't have you, wouldn't have your family, wouldn't have this community. I'd still be alone, still be running from who I used to be, instead of building who I wanted to become." Thomas nodded. "Dad used to say that the land teaches you things if you're willing to listen. Patience, because you can't rush a harvest. Humility, because nature doesn't care about your plans. Resilience, because every season brings new challenges. But I think the most important thing he learned, the thing he tried to teach us, but we were too young to understand, was that legacy isn't about holding on to things. It's about what you give away, what you invest in others, what you leave behind that makes the world a little better." The old tractor, fully restored, sat in the barn beside us. We'd gotten it running perfectly, but we rarely used it for actual work anymore. We had newer equipment that was more efficient, more reliable. But we kept it maintained, kept it polished and ready, because it was a reminder of where everything started. Sometimes, when I had a hard decision to make or felt overwhelmed by challenges, I'd come sit on that tractor and remember the feeling of opening that seat compartment and finding a choice waiting for me. Keep or return, easy or right. Who I was accused of being or who I wanted to become. By our 7th year, the farm was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined that first night sleeping in the barn, with mice in the walls. We'd expanded to 40 acres under cultivation, employed 6 full-time workers and a dozen part-time seasonal helpers. We'd built a small processing facility, to make our own jams, pickles, and preserved goods that sold year-round. Thomas and Rachel had gotten married in a ceremony in the South Field, with both families in attendance and half the town showing up to celebrate. They'd built their house on the back 40, and Rachel was pregnant with their first child, a baby who'd be born into a life connected to land and legacy, and the hard-won peace their grandfather had dreamed of. The Hendricks siblings had invested their shares of Robert's hidden money in various ways. Sarah had used hers to help her daughter pay for college. Michael had taken his family on a trip to Ireland to see the land their great-grandparents had left generations ago. Jenny and Marcus had donated theirs to a program that helped elderly people with medical expenses, honoring Margaret's memory. But they all agreed that the best return on their father's hidden savings was what had grown here, on this land, in this community of people who'd found each other through a choice made in a barn on a desperate night. I still lived in the main farmhouse, though it no longer felt too big or empty. There was always someone stopping by, always kids playing in the yard, always meals shared around the table my grandmother would have loved. I'd started dating a teacher from town named Lisa, who'd grown up on a farm and understood the rhythm of agricultural life, understood why I couldn't take vacations during planting or harvest, understood the satisfaction of eating food you'd grown with your own hands. We were taking it slow, building something real, and for the first time since before my life fell apart at 20, I could imagine a future that included marriage, kids, roots that went even deeper into this soil. On the 8th anniversary of the day I'd bought the farm, we held a celebration. Everyone was there, all 4 Hendricks siblings and their families, our employees and their families, neighbors, friends, people from town who'd supported us from the beginning. We roasted a pig that we'd raised ourselves, served vegetables from our fields, bread made from wheat grown on Earl's land next door, cheese from our own goats. As the sun set and people gathered around multiple fire pits scattered across the property, Sarah asked if she could say something. She stood on the porch of the restored farmhouse, and the crowd gradually quieted. 8 years ago, she began, a young man bought this property for $100 because he had nothing left to lose. He didn't know anything about farming. He didn't know the history of this place or the family who'd loved it and lost it. All he knew was that he needed to start over, needed to prove to himself that he was better than what the world had told him he was. She paused, emotion thick in her voice. And then he found money that could have changed his life, and he made a choice. The hard choice, the right choice, the choice that brought my family back together and gave this land new life. Tommy, she continued, looking directly at me, you've probably heard this before, but I need to say it again in front of all these witnesses. You didn't just restore a farm, you restored faith. Faith in honesty, faith in second chances, faith in the idea that good people exist and that doing the right thing matters. My father died believing he'd failed, believing his children didn't love him or this place, believing his legacy was nothing but debt and broken dreams. But you proved him wrong. You proved that the values he held on to, the principles he tried to instill in us, the belief that land and hard work and integrity matter, you proved all of that was true. Thomas stood up and joined his sister on the porch. When I came back here 3 months after Tommy bought the place, I was running away from a life that felt meaningless. I'd spent years being angry at our dad for caring more about this farm than about us, for working himself to death, for choosing dirt over his children. But working this land with Tommy taught me something. Dad didn't choose the farm over us. He chose to show us through his actions what it means to commit to something, to pour your life into something bigger than yourself, to believe that your work matters even when it's hard and thankless and nobody understands why you do it. The crowd was silent, except for the crackling of fires and the soft sounds of the evening settling in around us. I felt Lisa's hand slip into mine, felt the weight of all these people who'd become my family, felt the solid earth beneath my feet that I'd learned to work and trust and love. I don't have a big speech prepared, I said, standing up. I'm not good with words like Sarah and Thomas, but I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on some kid who showed up with nothing. Thank you for teaching me everything I know about farming, about community, about what it means to belong somewhere. And thank you to Robert and Margaret Hendricks, who I never met, but who gave me more than they could have possibly known. I pulled the metal box from under my chair, the one that had held the money, and the journal, and the beginning of everything. Sarah gave this back to me last year, said I should have it since I found it. Inside, there's still one thing we haven't shared with everyone. I opened it and pulled out a letter, separate from the journal, sealed in an envelope that had yellowed with age. This was at the very bottom of the box. It's addressed to whoever finds this. I think it's time we read it. I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the single page inside. Robert Hendricks' handwriting was shakier here than in the journal, written in his final days. I read aloud, "If you found this money, you've also found my secrets, my regrets, and my hopes. I don't know who you are, but I know something important about you already. You looked inside an old tractor. You were curious. You were thorough. You paid attention to details. Those are farmers' traits, and good traits for any person. This money represents years of work, of saving, of sacrifice. I wanted to leave it to my children, but I failed to tell them I loved them enough, failed to show them that I valued them more than this land. That's my great regret. So if you're reading this, I have one request. Use this money to build something good. Use it to connect with people, to create something that matters, to show the people you love that you love them. Don't make my mistakes. Don't hold on to things so tightly that you forget what you're holding them for. And if you can, if it's possible, find my children and tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I loved them more than anything, even this farm. I just didn't know how to show it. Yours in hope, Robert Hendricks." The silence that followed was profound. Then Jenny started clapping, and Michael joined her, and soon everyone was applauding through tears, celebrating a man who'd died years ago, but whose words and wishes had somehow reached across time to create something beautiful. Sarah walked over and hugged me tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You did exactly what he asked. You built something good. You connected people. You showed all of us what love and family actually mean. Thank you for finding that tractor. Thank you for being curious. Thank you for being you." As the party continued into the night, I found myself back at the barn, looking at that old John Deere tractor, gleaming in the moonlight. It was just a machine, just metal and rubber and mechanical parts. But it had also been a vessel carrying a message from one generation to another, carrying a choice that would define my life, carrying the seeds of something I couldn't have imagined that desperate night when I first cleared away the vines and discovered its secret. I thought about that scared 23-year-old kid who'd walked out of reform school with $72 and a heart full of anger. I thought about how easily he could have become bitter, could have kept that money, could have justified theft as survival. And I thought about how one choice, one hard, right choice, had opened up a path to everything good in my life now. The farm, the family, the community, the purpose, the peace, none of it would have existed if I'd taken the easy way out. Someone once told me that character is what you do when nobody's watching. But I think it's more than that. Character is what you do when everyone would understand if you made the wrong choice. Character is choosing right over easy, choosing truth over convenience, choosing who you want to become over who circumstances tried to make you. And character, real character, doesn't come from never falling. It comes from getting back up, from trying again, from believing that you're more than the worst thing that ever happened to you. The farm taught me that. The land taught me that. And Robert Hendricks, a man I never met but who changed my life completely, taught me that. His hidden money wasn't just currency. It was a test, an opportunity, a crossroads where I had to decide who I was going to be. And every day since then, every morning I wake up on this land and work this soil and build this life, I'm grateful I made the choice I did, because in the end, that's what legacy really is. It's not the things you leave behind. It's not the money or the property or the physical stuff. Legacy is the choices you make that echo forward, the values you live by that influence others, the small acts of integrity that ripple outward in ways you might never see. Robert Hendricks's legacy wasn't 47 acres of farmland. It was the belief that doing right matters, that family matters, that honest work and love and second chances matter. And somehow, through an old tractor and a metal box and a choice made in a dark barn, that legacy found its way to me and gave me everything I needed to build a life worth living. So that's Tommy's story, and honestly, I hope it touched something in you the way it touched me telling it. If you've made it all the way to the end, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about real stories, real struggles, and the choices that define us. Drop a comment and tell me what you learned from Tommy's journey. Have you ever had to make a choice between what was easy and what was right? How did it turn out? And if you've got your own second chance story, I'd love to hear it. This community is built on supporting each other, on believing that our pasts don't have to define our futures, and on celebrating the courage it takes to keep choosing integrity even when it costs us. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to become who you want to be. Thanks for being here, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.